Moche art is famous for two things. The first is Moche portrait heads, which we've already taken a look at, and those are justifiably famous. The second thing is the Moche sex pots, and the author of our book seems to have censored us on those, but I think you can't know Moche without at least seeing a couple of them, so I've included them at the end. These are famous, or perhaps I should say infamous, and we have a sampling up on the screen right now. They consist of erotic images of absolutely every conceivable type, but usually when we're dealing with human beings, not leading to reproduction, which makes it a little bit difficult to interpret these. There's anal sex, there's oral sex, very little between human beings, sex that actually would be vaginal, that would allow a man and a woman to reproduce, to produce a child. There are images of animals having sex, and I have for your delectation up in the upper left some mice, and I also have some llamas in the lower right hand corner of the slide. The other images, though, most of them are images that would not produce offspring, with the exception of the piece in the center top, which does seem to be traditional intercourse. The image in our upper right is a depiction of a human female and a skeletal male. The images in the middle bottom include a skeletal male apparently having sex with, and that's right down here, right here, with a female. And then right next to that, there are two skeletons having sex. And then in the far left corner, that would be an example of oral sex. Okay, so what in the world do these mean? How can we explain these? Because there are a lot of them that have been made. One of the explanations is that they may indeed on some level relate to fertility and reproduction, and perhaps that is true. And I'm going to show you one in a minute that I think might actually fall into that category. In addition to that, they might make reference to the ancestors and the continuation of the ancestors. And although the ancestors can't have sex anymore, they are in fact, and their sexual fertility, in fact, has allowed the generation to continue. And it may be a way of remembering the ancestors or making a connection with the ancestors. So if we have skeletal figures involved in a sexual act, you might at least consider the possibility that it does relate to the ancestors in some way. Okay, there is another suggestion that's been made, and it is basically tinku. The idea of encounters, of two things coming together. Perhaps because these are usually created with stirrup spout vessels. There is an argument for tinku. I can't be sure of that. Let me give you my last interpretation, and that is that some of these may in fact have been intended to be humorous. Let me give you just two samples that might fall in this category. Okay, these are my last Moche sex pots, and the two that are located on the left, I think, may indeed have been intended with some kind of humor. The one at the bottom is a female figure, and it does indeed look like she's having sex with a stirrup of spout vessel shape. The one up above in the top corner is actually a cup. It's not a stirrup spout. So it's not intended in the traditional manner of two figures coming together. I think instead it was intended to be humorous, because when you pour the liquid into this, I want you to think of it as a cup, and you pick this, and it's a skeletal figure. You pick this skeletal figure up and you go to drink out of it, it is going to drip out of the holes at the top. What that means is, if you use this as a drinking vessel, the only way you can drink out of this is out of the penis of the figure, the skeletal figure, perhaps an ancestral figure. But I think there is intended to be some element of humor associated with those two vessels. My last comment is in reference to the possibility of fertility reproduction. The image lower right is a male and female attempting to have sex that would indeed produce children, but they're doing it under a blanket, and usually that doesn't happen. In looking at the sexual images, the erotic images that Moche produces, those are usually just two figures of various groupings, but nevertheless two figures. To show two figures under a blanket, you have to start asking, well, why is this different? And I wonder if, in fact, it is not a little bit like the curing scene. If you go up to the top, and that is our owl shamaness, you're going to see that the figure that she's curing is under a blanket, and that blanket has crosses or X's on it, just as the couple in the bottom right are under a blanket with crosses or X's. So in this case, I wonder if indeed it is not in reference to perhaps some effort to enhance their ability to produce children within the relationship. Okay, leaving the Moche sex pots, that takes me now to the last slide that I have for us. It's figure 108 in the textbook. Moche domination on the North Coast is going to collapse. It's going to collapse because of environmental upheaval. That is going to be driven by El Nino, which is going to bring about droughts, floods, and really disastrous, unpredictable weather. It's going to damage the monuments. It is going to cause crop failure, and ultimately, because this is not going to be a one-time thing, it's going to last for a while, it's going to encourage the decline of the Moche culture. This is going to allow influences to come in from outside, in particular from the Wari, and that is spelled a couple different ways. The Wari culture, which is where we're going to turn next, their style tends to be very rigid and angular and very, very symmetrical. They also tend to favor the staff god, which was featured in Chavin. And in figure 108, which is a textile, and we do not have many surviving textiles from the Moche culture, this is one of them. It was a portion of the hem of a mantle, of a cloak, and in it you can see the staff god. This staff god, the presence of the staff god in Moche now, however, is due to exterior influences coming in from the Wari.